And of course, my question that I asked you last week was how do organs fall out of bodies? You know?
Right. Yeah. And this is a question I get asked all the time. After I started digging into the mountain and in depth, I just started looking at all the rocks around me differently, because I'm like, well, if this isn't what they tell us it is, what is it really? And there's so many times I've seen rocks and I'm just looking at it going, wow, that looks like a piece of meat, or that looks like a this, or that, and that's, was what was interesting about Mud Fossil University with Roger, is that I was seeing him talk about these things, but very often he was like 100% certain that it was a this, and I'm looking at the rock, I'm going, yeah, maybe, or maybe it's just a rock, it wasn't so clearly defined. And I was frustrated by that. And I've talked to a number of PhDs about the work that I've done. And, a couple of them are on board. I've talked to medical doctors. I've talked to, a lot of different people who are professionals who've looked at the research, and they're totally on board with the findings. So anyway, I started looking at the stones differently. And that was when I started to notice another pattern emerging in smaller stones, which really became as big of a discovery, if not bigger, than the mountain.
Yeah. So this is another thing that, I saw with Roger. He sort of shows all these rocks and he's like, this is a heart, this is a brain. I'm like, really? Yeah. And, he used to show the quartz layers and that, and it's like, this is a fat layer. And it's like, well, yeah, it kind of does look like that, but, it could just be quartz. But then, you went a bit deeper into it with, especially with the hearts, didn't you? Like what are called we're calling heart stones. And of course, my question that I asked you last week was how do organs fall out of bodies?
Right. Yeah. And this is a question I get asked all the time about, like, was there some kind of a worldwide ritual that resulted in, the removal of these? And I abandoned that idea very, very early on, because it became, it's just obvious. And if it were the case, you would expect there to be portions of the body still connected and remaining. So why would the organs just like pop out of the body? And so that was a real confusion for me, because the way this whole thing began is I went out into the river bottom just looking at tons of rocks. Because I wanted to find an example of a mud fossil that was just clear as day. And I was frustrated by the lack of clarity. It was like, if this is true, and it is true that, so much of the stone that we see is, has biological in origin. I'm not talking about the 300 million year timeline, where they talk about sedimentary layers compressing dead creatures and then turning them into different kinds of stone in these just nice, neat layers. And then they age, they document the age of that stuff based on strata and based on different questionable techniques that are often, debated, hotly debated as they're being introduced. And then later you just like sweep aside all the debate and say, no, this is effective. But, even things like carbon dating are known to be effective in the thousands of years. And the further you go with it, the less accurate it becomes. So, I went out and just in the first day after really putting it out there that I would like to find something, I looked down and I found this rock in the river bottom. And it might not mean much to people who don't know the anatomy, but when I saw this, I immediately was taken by the fact that it's got a fleshy color, but it's surrounded in white. And everywhere the white is removed, it's red underneath. And that's how the heart is. We have the pericardium, which is a fatty sac, and then inside of that is the heart muscle. Yeah. And then the next thing I noticed was this, which is known as the isthmus, which is where the valves open to let the blood into the different chambers. There's these muscles that are called papillary muscles that have cords that connect to the valves and open the valves like this as the heart is doing its thing, you know. And there's a space between the pulmonary arteries that's known as the isthmus, and it's right there. And then there's bumps inside that you can see, and I believe those to be the remains of the papillary muscles. So that's already just in the space in the river bottom. Looking at this in 2 minutes, there was already like a list of coincidences for this one stone. Now, if you think of this as the atrium and this is the ventricle, there's the 4 chambers of the heart. Everything's backwards here, so I'm pointing at the wrong things. I gotta get my head straightened out. There we go. That hole is right where the coronary artery would be. And then along this line is what's known as the coronary sulcus. So if you look at the atrium and the ventricle, there's a fatty portion that sits right there on the sulcus line where the coronary sulcus is. So already how many coincidences is that, right? You've got the pericardium, and then you have this overall heart shape, which I'll talk about more in a moment. But look at this. Above and behind. So if you've got one side above and behind this is the aorta and the vena cava openings. So I was just blown away by this. I filmed a video. I had problems with mud fossil theory. Now we come back to your main question, which is important, because I'm not trying to evade it. This idea of the organs popping out of the body made no sense. And so right off the bat, I was like, well, somehow the external portion of the body is being destroyed while the petrified organ is happening. And so in order to test the theory, because I found this rock and I had already accumulated in the space of a couple days looking at it and comparing it to anatomy, I had about a list of 15 different coincidences on the coincidence list.
So yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I'm like most people. I was seeing this stuff and going, but I'm not a biologist. But when you start pointing out all the actual biological, pointers in there, it becomes a different story, doesn't it?
Well, this is something I was thinking of talking about also today is like when I did my master's thesis in chiropractic college, I picked a ridiculously hard subject and sweat blood for about a year over that thing. And it was on chiropractic manipulation technique and its effects on autonomic disease, which, you want to make your life complex. That's the good way to do it. And it was all in Swedish. So this was a master's thesis. It took a year to write. We had 7 pages of footnotes, and every single footnote was from a published study that we had read, not a Google link or something that we found. So and that's just such a long, convoluted process to do that.
My mind got blown last week when I found out that the heart is actually a tube that's been basically wrapped up, and it's got a half twist in it. And then it seems that the fatty sac around it is to hold it in that configuration, in that shape, right? Yeah.
And that's, so let me just get that question out of the way real quick before I forget to answer it. So my answer to that changed over time. And now I've basically, I'm calling it boiled egg theory, for lack of a better term. Yeah. The idea being that because the heart is in with the pericardium, which is this fatty sac. I mean, just to finish a point I was making before about this. So I went out into the field, and I've done this live. It's not just me cherry picking. I've gone out live, and in the space of 15 minutes, I've gathered a dozen of these things. And I started to recognize that there was a reoccurring, very, very specific pattern that was happening in the stones. It was happening across all sizes. And it was in the larger stones, they often exhibit these same features. And when you start to add up all of the different features, you start to get a very long list of coincidences. And that's what I'm showing here. You see that?
Yeah.
So this isn't in any kind of specific order. These are just the things that I found as I found them. But basically, the general idea is that the heart takes on a harp shape, right? And it can be any one of many different kinds of shapes, because it can be like larger, like a I'm in the stone hearts here. Let me get to the fleshy hearts.
Like basically, they're from all different animals, so we can be looking at an elephant heart to a mouse heart kind of thing.
Exactly, right. So if you look at an elephant heart and you compare that to a giraffe's heart, for example, or the other organs, I get that question all the time. Are the other organs there? Yes, they are, but they're not as distinct. Like here's a liver. This is a lobe line, so I theorize that it's going to cleave along these lines because these are actually two separate pieces. So then you end up with a rock that looks like this, and maybe it's got some kind of an indentation in the back, but there's not a whole lot there to go on, just morphologically to make any kind of a claim about what it is or isn't. Whereas hearts have very, very specific anatomy because they've got, take a look at this. This is a decellularized heart. They've removed all the blood, and you can see that it's just bone white when the blood is gone. But there's very specific anatomical features like these lines here. This is called the septum. It's also known as the interventricular sulcus as well. And hearts, there's different kinds of blood, so there can be different colors. We have all kinds of different creatures, from little mice and birds all the way up to gigantic mammals and whales. Like a whale's heart is the size of a car.
VW,
right?
Beetle, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the process of decellularization. So whatever the cataclysm is, it removes blood from most of these, because a lot of these stones, and I've got a bunch of them here picked out, which I'll show in a moment. A lot of these stones are bone white, and you break them open and they're still bone white. But others that are pink, when you break them open, a lot of times they'll show that they've got chambers or they've got blood vessels remaining. And this is what it looks like on the inside, but there's going to be compression. So you don't have these big openings. You've got basically a block of stone that's exhibiting indentations or openings on the side, little chambers. This is a close-up of what I was showing you before of, the isthmus and the papillary muscle. And I went inside this in the first video I made on the subject, which is called Mud Fossils, the Heart of the Matter, Part 1. And I went in with an endoscopic camera, which is what they use for like colonoscopies, and looked at the inner chambers of the heart. And it got even more specific once I got inside. There were another few items that are on the list. The petrified organs video was when I really first started to recognize that there were these reoccurring themes that went way beyond random chance. They were far too specific. And I realized that I was actually documenting a phenomenon here that wasn't recognized by mainstream geology. And, this one here, there's your isthmus again, there's your openings to the chamber. And then on the back side of this flattened portion, there's the aortal opening as well. And then there's another feature called which you can see right here, this little line here, that's called the interventricular sulcus. And that gets back to your question about the heart and how it fits together, which we'll come back to. So then I went out into the field and I broke a bunch of them open because I wanted to see what they looked like inside. I didn't have any saws or any ways of doing a clean cut, but I started to crack them open.
Has anyone ever scanned one?
Yeah, well, so I went out and spent $400 of my own money to have them CAT scanned, for the 4 with the chambers and with the openings. And it came back that there were some, but I already knew that there were some chambers inside because I could see them with the naked eye. So the heart muscle was way too dense. Sorry, not the muscle, but as it converts into stone, it's too dense to get a proper picture. To really, yeah. So you can see here, I've found found one there, and you see that it's white on the outside there. That's the remains, I believe, of the papillary muscle, and I found this in several stones. And then I break it open. Speed this up. There we go. You can see, the remains of chambers inside. So there was a whole lot of stuff that was stacking up with that. And we could talk for hours just about that one subject with regards to the stones. So then going back to your question about oh wait, I just want to show one last one here.
And so is that quartz? Is that like what we call quartz?
Yeah. And in what I've taken to calling biogeology, because I don't think mud fossil theory explains it. And when I get back to the boiled egg theory, I'll explain why. But mud fossil theory requires that something be encased in mud. And then how would that thing petrify and then be found completely separate from the body that it was in? It makes no sense.
Exactly.
And it took me, just because I didn't have an answer to that question didn't mean that I was going to throw out the empirical evidence. It's not that I'm like holding on desperately to my wacky theory. It's that the empirical evidence was what was leading me and guiding me in this exploration. So you can see how bloody this is, and there's a quartz quality as well. So my theory is that that anything that's fat related, fat in the body, ligament, tendon, nerve, disc, that when these things petrify, they petrify to different forms of quartz. And the color changes depending, like if it's blood, how much of the plasma is present or how much of the red blood cells are present. If it's something like a tendon, it would depend on the makeup of the tissues. So I got excited because this doctor who you mentioned before that made the discovery about the heart, which I'll introduce people to in a minute.
Oh wow! Okay.
All right. So this is looking like a total madman, but yeah. So basically, what happened is, as I started looking into this whole thing, I had all these different heart stones that I was finding, and they had these reoccurring patterns where it was like harp shape, flattened top, indentations or openings there, also on the side where the pulmonary arteries would be. They'll have these lines in them. Right, you can see one faint there. Whoop, I got my hands going the opposite direction, and then there it's very pronounced, right? So this rock for me, I found not so long ago. This represents what I call proof of concept, right? Because it's predictive as well. Like if I show you this rock based on what I've just shown you, you have a guess about what the rest of the rock is going to look like, right?
Yeah.
And if I show you the backside, you're going to realize that my guess was right? Now, if I turn it around, I show you, well, you can see that it's clearly broken there. And if you look inside, it's looking very meaty, even though the outside was white, right? So that's proof of concept because I actually had a prediction about this rock before I saw the rest of it, right? Same thing happened with this one because you can see the mud there. See the line of the mud? So I found this one face down, and I say face down, I'll explain that in a second. But it was buried to mud up to that point. Well, I saw this, and I said, there's the pattern again. There's your sulcus line, which I'll show in a minute why that line is there, because it's one of the most prominent features in the heart. And then there's indentations up here. So I saw this face down, buried in the mud, and I made a prediction about what the rest of the rock was going to look like. I said it's going to probably be faceted. It's going to have 3 faces that are going down in opposite directions, which relates to the pattern that I've documented in a bunch of videos, and sure enough, there it was. You have one face going down this way, one going down that way, and one going up this way. You have the flattening. So that, on the Wilkerson scale that I was showing before, that's an 8 or a 9 or something. There's a lot of coincidences that don't make sense. Another thing that they have, and this is the most specific of the things that I've found so far, apart from the blood vessels themselves and the chambers, which are pretty rare, and I think that's to do with compression. My hand's shaking. See that? See how it's like twisted like a propeller? That's a very specific thing, and that's something I can show over and over and over again in all different sizes. Right?
So and that's the half twist, is it?
That's not the half twist. We'll get to that in a minute. That is the twisting of the heart as it's contracting. And rigor mortis, when we die.
Oh, okay.
Our heart goes into contraction, just like all of the other blood vessels in the body. So here's another, and you can see your suture line. Yeah. Right. And then you'll see there's the front will be curved or faceted, and the back will typically be flat, and oftentimes it will bend in. And this is an exaggerated version of that, but you can see that's a very specific feature. Right, there's your indentation and discoloration at the top for the blood vessels, the curving in on the bottom, and then if you look at it from the bottom, there's that propeller shape again, right? So these are extremely specific kinds of finds, and the more of them you find, especially in a specific rock, right? Here's another. There's your twist again. There's your curved curved underside. So here's the thing. We're taught that these are just broken chunks of larger structures that have smoothed out in river bottoms. And the way they were formed is that there was compression for hundreds of millions of years that led to somewhere between you've got your sedimentary layering, then you've got your metamorphic rock. And the more pressure you have, the more heat and pressure, the more it starts to begin to melt, right? We got all the melted building guys and everything, and that's a metamorphic rock. And then it becomes igneous rock, which is your volcanic, which is pushed up again by the volcanoes. So that's what they're saying. Dead creatures, ocean floor, pressure, more dead creatures, layering, and then eventually stone. And then tectonic activity breaks those those layers upward, creating our mountains, which then break off into ever smaller pieces. And as they're working their way down the hills, they're going to erode and they're going to bump against each other. Well, that is bullshit. And I can tell you 100% in this area that there's two kinds of bone. I mean, there's two kinds of stone here. There's Titan and there's petrified organ, and there's basically nothing else, because if you go up the mountains, you have all of this broken material, but it doesn't look anything like any of these rocks. It's not on its way to becoming smooth. It works its way down the canyons, and when it gets to the bottoms of the canyons, it's still broken, fragmented rock that has no pattern in it whatsoever. And it's not magically going to jump into a river, roll around with its friends, and then develop all of these indentations, and these doesn't happen. So these other rocks are already there. Where did they come from? They didn't come from the mountains. They're not breakdown of the mountains, right? So they're probably coming from the mud flood, volcanic, whatever, killing all the creatures. And then so this gets back to the other question of why the organs. So my answer to that, I'll just read something that was written.
Of course, just one point would be, if it was a cataclysm, there'd be no predators to run around and eat them all.
Yeah, I'm sorry to.
Oh gosh,
this is really gruesome here, but this is known as the greater omentum. So here's your heart and your lungs, and then they're wrapped inside of this thick fatty sac, and then the intestines are as well, right? So these are two different chambers. Heart being up here, and this is what a heart looks like when it's really soft. You can see how malleable it is. So if you have contraction, which is rigor mortis, that's going to give the spiral contraction. And then any pressure is going to cause a closing of these. And I think that's why so many of the ones that I find are creases. And also the atriums, that's this floppy section here. I think these are burning away in the cataclysm. And just to answer the question, my theory, I call it boiled egg theory, because the basic idea is that whatever destroyed the creatures was completely cooking the outer portion of the body. And so if you put an egg in water and you start to boil it for any length of time, then you're going to get a hardening of the egg, right? You're going to get this.
You mentioned last week as well that there's a phenomenon of hearts that they've found when after cremations and things, and they find that the heart doesn't burn. That's the only bit that's left.
That's what I was just going to read to you, and I'll read that now that I've got that picture on the screen. Do you have that picture on the screen now?
Yep.
It's gruesome,
nice.
But so the lungs have been removed from here, right? Nice and meaty. So I said the heart is the densest muscle. That's why it's so prolific. Even with the cremated body, the only thing that isn't ash is the heart, and that was new to me until recently. And another guy sent me this message this is a guy named Derek, and he writes, petrified dog heart. He says, you're onto something here. A few months ago, I cremated my Rhodesian ridgeback on a funeral pyre that was 5 foot tall, 8 foot long, 4 foot wide, of solid seasoned oak. This wood is known for its great burning properties. When all was said and done, the only thing left that did not turn completely to ash was her heart. It was completely blackened and burnt, but still obviously a heart. Okay, so this gets back to the boiled egg theory. So imagine a heat that was much, much greater due to some worldwide cataclysm. What's that going to do to the outer portions of the body? Well, the boiled egg theory goes in hand in hand with bone broth. So I could call it bone broth theory, because why am I not finding the bones? Why I'm not finding skulls and brains? There are examples of brains, but they're very rare. And I think that's primarily because they vitrify. You know, I talked about fat becoming crystal. Well, if the heat is hot enough, that crystal then melts and it becomes fluid. So, you know, there's a lot that actually lines up with the theory, and I didn't know about this as I was trying to discover what's going on. But again, here's that fatty portion. I believe that all of this is getting burned away. So if you think of a pressure cooker, if you put bone inside of a pressure cooker, you cook it for 2 to 3 hours and it turns to sponge, right? You can get a T-bone in there, and people do this to make bone broth. They cook it down, and you know, the more they cook it, the softer it gets. Well, that's true of bone. But when you think of an egg and you think of the calcium shell in an egg, well, here's your pericardium. Of all the organs in the body, the heart has the thickest sac surrounding it, which is the pericardium. And sometimes that sac is remarkable. Okay, so it can be extremely thick, right? And all of this, I believe, is just eaten away. There's compression, and you can see how there's a curve here to the heart, just like I'm finding in the stones. And then there's this line again. This is one heart, and this is an elephant heart. See the differences in shape? Now think about those turning to stone and then getting some erosion and wear, right? You're gonna get a lot of different shapes of different kinds of rocks. This is a giraffe heart. This is pig or human, I can't remember which. And in fact, they've used pig parts in human transplants, right? And some people probably think there's not much of a difference between them. But so here you can see how floppy the atriums are. This is why I think in the cataclysm, this is being burned away, and why the harp shape, which is surprisingly the most distinct and easiest to spot, is actually the most common. So it's actually easiest to spot the ones that are least likely. Does that make sense? Like this harp shape is, you know, think of all the different kinds of harps that we have, and then all the different hearts. You know, so this is where we're getting into the, you know, this list of all of these different features. The more things that I find in a rock that's on this list, and the list for that first one I showed is up to 25. And that's because I've done the endoscopic camera work. I found stuff inside the heart as well. And this is without, I did a CAT scan of this stone. You know, I haven't done cross sections. I did that later in another video, because a lot of people were asking me, well, why don't you slice some open? And so I did that. So there you see the lines, and you see the heart and the structure of the heart. So every single aspect of everything that I've talked about, and there's your suture line, there's your blood vessel opening. Every single aspect of heart anatomy and function and physiology that I've just shown you, I found in the rocks, and I found it in spades. I literally have hundreds of examples. This one, oh, I was going to tell that earlier. I went back, because a lot of people asked about slicing them open, and I did that. So I found 12 of these in a river bottom, and I went over to his house. He had a grinder saw, and we sliced through them. And then this was one of the best of the 12, so I'll just show you the best first. There's your line. There's your kind of fatter side. There's your curved underside. There's your little knife edge. And then at the top, you've got the opening of the creases of the remains of the blood vessels there. So that's a lot of them. That's just one of many. And then I didn't want to polish this side, because look at that. See how where the top, so either a blood vessel going sideways. Let me show you what the blood vessels look like in the heart. See this one going across? Yep. It says what blood vessels look like in the human heart. You see that?
I see. So you cut it,
So you see this fractal. So I find a bunch of rocks where, like, this whole network and structure of blood vessels and how it's fractal like a tree upside down. Yep. I found this in the stones also. Many of the stones, I've shown that in the videos as well. So, and it's not like a creature went along and ate a groove in the rock, you know, and then went off in another direction. It would have to go out, make smaller and smaller grooves, turn around, and then go this way, turn around and come back. And there's no way that's what's happening. So this one, I didn't polish this one, but you can see here it's where the saw blade broke it. But you can see at the top of where either one of the chambers or both of the chambers or a blood vessel going across would be. That's in alignment with my theory about heart stones being, that the fat is going to petrify to different forms of quartz. You can see the reddish lines in here, and then here I believe is either the top of the chamber or one of the bigger blood vessels going across the central portion of the heart. And then I polished that one here.
It's a bit gross, isn't it? That means a lot of this marbly sort of rocks and stuff that we like is the insides of old animals.
Yeah, it's kind of gruesome when you start to think about it.
Yeah.
So here you can see the red.
Yeah, wow.
Right? And you can see the remains of the blood vessel there. And around the outer edges, you're seeing the blood. But when you get into these other ones, they're bone white. So I think the process itself, or it's really nice and pink, like some of the bigger, fatter ones that still have their color. Like this one, I haven't sliced open yet. But if you look at this one, see the blood vessels there at the top, right where they should be. There's the tapering in on the sides. There's the bottom there. Right, that one. If I cut that one across, there's a good chance that I might find stuff in here. But I lose so much with the saw blade. I lose so much material. I'd like to get fine, like laser cut, and have wet like slices, so that I can compare going down to see if there's any anatomy showing itself. But right now, this for example, I showed before with the indentations. If I put this one in water. It just comes alive.
Gold veins, which we talk about veins all the time with ground. And do they talk about meat? Do they say marbling with meat? They do, don't they?
They use marbling as a term that they use for hearts as well. Yeah. So I mean I could just go for 2 hours just showing you the examples over and over and over again. So anyone who says this is random chance, I say prove it. Go find a bunch of random rocks, film every step, and then put them into a tumbler and create these rocks. I challenge you. Not happening. What does that look like?
What's that, a brain, is it?
I think this is one hemisphere of a brain, and there's an indentation right here. So if this is the front of the brain and this is the back, there's an indentation in our brains right where the cerebellum is.
Yeah,
and right where the two halves of the brain meet in the central portion is the corpus callosum, and that's where the greatest amount of blood flow in the body is. So what is the brain? Fat.
Wow, fat.
And the blood flow is gonna be crystal.
Wow.
Right? So this is where you gotta look at the odds of things. I've shown this list a bunch of times now.
That list, that's great.
And that list is important because that can be a guideline, and people who aren't cardiologists and haven't studied a lot, they can go online and they can look at the anatomy of a bunch of different hearts, and they can look at the things that I've shown today, and they'll start to get a feel at least for the basics, and then they won't look so silly if they find some rocks. I've had lots of people from around the world that have shown me amazing examples of these stones. Some of this, and like I said, I had them CAT scanned, and there you see that this knife shape. You can see that one's been broken. As soon as there's any kind of a fracture, it immediately it changes its look dramatically. You see these red lines, right, that are also right where the sutures would be.
Yeah.
What are the odds?
Oh my God.
So there's your isthmus going into chambers, right? So based on what I've shown already, you would expect what? Flattened top, and then at the above on the slightly downhill side of the top, you'd expect there to be some kind of an opening for the aorta, right?
Yeah.
Well,
into at the back. There we go. Yeah.
There it is, and it's even opening into a chamber.
Oh, you can see straight through it.
Yeah, and you see the curved line there going. It's hard for me to show, but it's going down, curving where this hand is. Sorry.
Yeah. Underneath
that curved line. Yeah. There's your sulcus line. This. How big was that creature?
Big, right? Still complaining. This is all about, you know, a lot of theories have no basis, but you've got to look in, do theories have a basis? What are they based on? And check it out. And most of all, guys, don't believe or disbelieve things just on what the popular opinion is. Trust yourself a bit. Go in and understand that you're, you know, the collective is kind of silly, and you're much smarter on your own rather than joining the collective. So that's what this is really all about, isn't it? Being autodidactic, of course. Be self-educated, because if you're not, the only choice we'll have left is to believe what they tell us, right? And as we know, a lot of that is just crap.
That kind of thing can kill you nowadays.
That kind of stuff will kill you. Definitely kill your brain. The link for Mike's channel is below, so make sure you do go across, check it out, share the work around, guys. Let's get it out there. And stay awesome and have an amazing night, day, afternoon, wherever you are on the realm. Bye for now.